So I've had my Hackintosh for about 1.5 years now, and I wanted to share with you guys my experience, how it compares to other Macs, and whether or not it's right for you. So let's jump straight into it. For the case, I picked a Corsair Crystal Series 460X. You can now get this case in 3 different sizes and 2 different colours, so there's plenty of variation. The main reason I picked this case is because of how good looking it is. At the time, there was no other case that looked like this. One of my favourite features of this case is the shroud at the bottom, which hides the power supply and the cables, so it keeps it looking super clean. Up on top you just have your standard I/O with a couple USB 3s. There are also dust filters in the front fan intake and underneath the power supply to help keep dust out. Inside the case I have an Asus Maximus code board with an i7-7700K. So not only does this processor support multi-threading, but it can also be overclocked really easily with the H100i cooling it. Powering my 4K display, I have a GTX 1080 STRIX edition. The main reason I picked this was because the fans don't turn on until you do more graphic intensive applications, so it really adds to the fact that this is a quiet Hackintosh. To really give it that aesthetic finish, I got 16GB of LED RAM, red and black braided cables, and some LED fans which can do a pretty cool light show. So that's basically my Hackintosh, but how does it perform to other Macs? So to give you guys a good idea of how my Hackintosh performs, I'm going to use 3 popular benchmark tools: Geekbench 4, CINEBENCH, and NOVABENCH. If you don't know how Geekbench works, it gives you back 2 scores for your system. One is the single core score, and one is the multi-core score. So the single core score gives you an idea of how your computer would perform in everyday applications like Google Chrome, whereas the multi-core score will give you an idea of how your computer can perform in an app like Final Cut Pro X, for example. So my Hackintosh got around 5800 in the single core and 20,000 in the multi-core. So moving on to CINEBENCH, which can also benchmark the GPU as well as the CPU. So the i7 scored 995 points and the GPU scored 126 frames per second. And finally, a score of 2083 was scored on NOVABENCH. And then I overclocked it. I got it to 4.8 GHz pretty easily. So that put the Geekbench scores up to around 6200 and 21,000. It put the CINEBENCH up to 1072 points for the CPU and 134 frames per second for the GPU. And it also added around 100 points for the NOVABENCH score. So according to the overclock benchmarks and the Geekbench 4 website, this computer is faster than anything Apple sell at daily browsing, which is essentially what all Mac users do anyway. I think what impresses me most are the temperatures that I get. When it's not overclocked, I get around low 60s for these benchmarks, and overclocked I get around mid 80s without any thermal throttling. My MacBook nowadays with thermal throttle for fun. Even looking at these graphs, you can see how linear the trend is as the stress test goes on. So let's put it in terms of price per performance point so we can actively compare this to how other Macs compare. So for this value, the lower the value is, the better it is. So my Hackintosh, with the screen included, costs around £1,950. So using the Geekbench 4 benchmark, my normal clock gives me a price of 9.7p per performance point, and overclocked I get around 9.2p per performance point. A comparable Mac costs around £2,600, which is being generous to be honest, and you're looking around 13p per performance point. That's 39% more cost per performance point. So who is a Hackintosh for then? Well, it's not for everyone. Installation is not just as easy as putting Mac on a USB pen and installing it onto the computer. No. It requires a certain amount of knowledge, help from others, drivers, and if you haven't picked the right PC parts, the installation process could be a complete and utter nightmare. But the help is out there. Websites like Tony Mac X86, which I'll leave a link down to in the description, helped me build my computer. So if you concede the fact that it's not going to be a plug and play situation, not only will you get to see money, but you'll also reap the benefits of upgradability and flexibility. If you're interested in building a Hackintosh yourself, I'll leave all the links to the communities that I used in the description below. And if you have any other questions, just comment below the video and I'll answer them as soon as I can.